In this episode, our final review of the Sound Devices MixPre 10T. Couple things before we get started. I have now had the Sound Devices MixPre 10T for a couple of months. I purchased it with my own money, so I don't have any sort of obligation to say anything one way or the other. And also I've used it on several projects, including several of my previous YouTube episodes here. I'm not going to go over all of the specifications and things of that nature. If you are interested in an overview of the device, go ahead and take a look at my first impressions video, which you can find up here. In Sound Devices' overall product lineup, this falls into kind of an interesting position between their kind of more consumer prosumer-oriented MixPre 3 and 6 and their professional series mixers in the 600 range. So that's the 633, 664, and 688. A big question is, well, who is this device for? And it's not just a MixPre 3 or 6 with more inputs. There actually are some additional professional level features on it that make it a little bit unique from that standpoint. But it does have the same preamplifiers and limiters and a lot of the same circuitry, it appears from my tests. So it sounds the same as the MixPre 3 and 6. You're not getting an upgrade in terms of audio, which was already stellar with the MixPre 3 and 6, but you are getting some additional professional features like timecode as well as backup recording. So this device really kind of fits a niche for certain types of people. I think it's a great backup recorder for a seasoned professional location sound mixer. And in fact, that's generally what I'm going to be using it for, or in cases where I need a lot of inputs, more than the 6 microphone and 3 line level inputs that I have on my Sound Devices 633. I think it could also be a really great recorder / mixer for someone who's just getting a start and is an aspiring professional location sound mixer. I think a great device here. You can definitely grow into it. It's less expensive than the 600 series mixers from Sound Devices, but you're getting incredible audio quality and a lot of really great features that can really enable you to do pretty much any location sound job. In Sound Devices' own marketing material, they say that the MixPre 10T is perfect for production sound mixers, field recordists, and sound designers. That's a little bit different from the MixPre 3 and 6, which was aimed at a wider audience, which included enthusiasts, musicians, podcasters, and YouTubers as well. In terms of price, this runs $1,800 US at the time of this review. A couple questions came up when we did our initial impressions, and I want to go ahead and address some of those. First of all, as an audio interface, how is the MixPre 10T? Some people I think are thinking of this or a MixPre 3 or 6 as a way to kind of kill two birds with one stone, to have a field mixer recorder and also have an audio interface for their computer where you can hook it up to the computer, all the computer's audio plays back through it, and you can record into your computer with the MixPre. It works fine. It's actually, again, very good preamplifiers, very good sound quality. One of the questions that came up is, what is the latency like? This is especially important to people who are recording music, especially if they're overdubbing. That is to say, they're playing back a track or a series of tracks at the same time they're recording, laying down a new track. So this is important because you don't want those two to be too far out of sync. So to measure this is kind of a case-by-case basis. There's not a perfect way for me to measure this for all circumstances, so this is my specific setup and this is the result that I got. In this case, we hooked it up via USB-C direct into my 2016 MacBook Pro, which has a USB-C input. According to the operating system, it connected via USB 3, not USB 3.1 or Thunderbolt. We had one track that was already recorded in Adobe Audition. We set the I/O buffer to 64 samples. And what we did is we played back that one track. That went out the output of the MixPre 10T, and we routed that via physical cable back into an input on the MixPre 10T. And what we found was a 6 millisecond latency. So overall, to me, that seems pretty good. Those of you that are way into recording music, you can determine for yourself if that's good enough. I found it overall very usable, but again, I don't do a lot of music recording, so that is just a data point for you to take and decide whether or not that's good enough for you. One very cool feature on the MixPre 10T and the MixPre 3 and 6 as well is that you can record to the MixPre at the same time that you're sending the audio to your computer via USB. So you can record on your computer and on your MixPre at the same time. The headphone amplifier on the MixPre 10T is very high quality, seemed very balanced to me. I really appreciate that because when you are doing a full day job and you're wearing headphones pretty much all day long, having something that's exceptionally bright or exceptionally bassy really becomes fatiguing. And this overall seemed very well balanced. Can't necessarily say that of some of the competing products out there. In terms of power for the MixPre 10T, this is a little bit different than the MixPre 3 and 6. The MixPre 10T, for the record, cannot be powered via USB-C. Its power requirements are just too high, can't do it. But you do have the option of the 8 AA battery sled that comes with the unit. There is also an MPF-style battery sled that comes separately, and that's generally what I use when I'm operating from a bag. You can also feed power via Hiroshi input, and that's really cool because then you can use all sorts of external batteries, much higher capacity, and there are lots of them, such as NP1-style batteries that are often used by sound mixers. You can also even use cinema batteries like Anton Bauer or V-Lock if they have a D-tap output. The MixPre 10T can record up to 192 kilohertz sample rates. Is that overkill? Well, probably not if you're doing something specialized like recording sound effects where you want to be able to slow them down dramatically in post, and then that way you have a lot more samples to work with when you do your resampling. Of course, you can record 16 or 24-bit. The new Kashmere Preamps in the MixPre 10T are the same, it looks like and sounds like, as the MixPre 3 and 6. They are fantastic preamps with 76 decibels of gain. They are discrete Class A preamps. They are using actual electronic components and not just an integrated circuit that Sound Devices bought from some other company. They've actually designed these with individual components, and they sound fantastic and they really, really work well. The MixPre 10T has the same great analog limiters that we found in the MixPre 3 and 6. They prevent the clipping distortion that you would sometimes get if your talent suddenly gets very loud, louder than you expected, and you didn't have the gain set appropriately for that. So it's a really nice feature to have. I've had these really help me out on a few occasions. I don't want to overstate it and say that this is going to be like the perfect solution that will save you in every circumstance. If you don't set your gain correctly, you'll still have problems. But this is really nice if the talent suddenly gets loud. Occasionally, this will help make sure that you get a nice clean recording without having to do a retake. The MixPre 10T also works with the Sound Devices Wingman app, which you can use both on iOS and Android devices. This is a super nice app that allows you to look at your meters on a much larger screen, which is helpful. And it also allows you to do a lot of other little things like start and stop recording, indicate a false take. It also allows you to change your metadata, change the name of the files, change the number of the files, add notes, and it also allows you to arm and disarm tracks for recording. So you have a lot of flexibility here. I've come to rely on this quite a lot because using a larger screen like one of the larger smartphones or perhaps an iPad makes it a lot easier to see all of the meters in much more detail. Just like on the MixPre 3 and 6, there is a single SD card slot on the MixPre 10T, and Sound Devices has a variety of cards that they've tested. I would recommend you look at those. I've also put a link to the ones that I'm using down below. I use this card in my MixPre 6, in my MixPre 10T, and my Sound Devices 633 flawlessly. Never had an issue with any of them, so definitely worth a look. Now, in addition to that, when people were comparing the MixPre 3 and 6 and 10T to the Zoom F4 and F8, one of the complaints that people had about the MixPre series was that there was no redundancy. There was no second card that you could record to. On the MixPre 10T, that's changed a little bit. Now, instead of having a second SD card, the 10T has a USB Thumbdrive capability that actually copies your files while you're recording to a USB Thumbdrive in the USB-A port on the left-hand side. Now, this is of course not the exact same as having two SD cards, but it works quite nicely. What I found is it actually starts writing it while you're recording and finishes it within just a second or two when you stop your recording. The nice thing about having the thumb drive is that you can get very inexpensive media so that when you're at the end of the day or perhaps midway through the day and the DIT or the director or the producer needs a copy of your sound files, it's very easy to pull it out and hand that over to them. And in fact, I like it because you also don't have to worry as much about them not returning it because the media is fairly inexpensive. Speaking of the USB-A port, you can also connect a keyboard if you want to enter metadata, that is, change the file names, enter notes, things of that nature. And you can also produce a sound report directly from the recorder, so that's a really nice feature as well. The only downside is, if you are using the file copy feature to a thumb drive, you cannot at the same time also use a keyboard. One of the big upgrades on the MixPre 10T over the MixPre 3 and 6 is that it now has an inbuilt timecode generator, and it's a very high quality one. We did a 10-hour test comparing it to our Tentacle Sync E external timecode generator, and what we found is after 10 hours, we were still frame accurate. So definitely these two are talking in sync, and that is good news because that means that you probably wouldn't even have to resync midway through the day when you're doing a full day production, which is really nice as well. Now, just like the MixPre 3 and 6, you also have some kind of extended timecode features, if you will. The timecode in and outs are BNC connectors on the MixPre 10T, but you also have the 3.5mm auxiliary input, which can be used, and you have an HDMI micro connector, which allows you to connect to certain cameras that send timecodes. So for example, with the Panasonic GH5, you can connect that to the MixPre 10T via HDMI cable. The camera will send its HDMI signal into the MixPre 10T, so they'll be recording the exact same timecode. And in addition to that, you can set up timecode signals so that when you start recording on your camera, the MixPre 10T also starts recording. Very nice feature as well. I have only one thing that I don't love about the MixPre 10T, and that is the headphone encoder or volume or menu encoder. It's all one shared knob, is on the right-hand panel. And when you're operating from a bag, it's a little bit difficult to reach. I've learned to live with it, and the way I do that is I actually orient the MixPre in the bag such that it's sitting up a little bit higher, so the top part of the mixer actually comes out of the bag a little bit. That makes it a lot easier to reach that knob and use it. It's also very close to the headphone output, so you kind of have that to contend with as well. Now, this is not a deal breaker for me, but I would really prefer to see it on the front. Can you update that with the firmware update? Of course not, so it's something I just wanted to point out. If that's important to you, ergonomically, that can be a little bit of a challenge. What I found generally is that I don't have to change the headphone volume a whole lot anyway. Once we kind of get into the groove of shooting and I've got my levels set, got everything set up, generally my headphone volume is not going to change a whole lot. So it's not as if I'm reaching down there and trying to change it all the time. And by that point, I've also got most of the settings in the menu set up. So you'll have to decide for yourself if that's a deal breaker. I don't think it is for me. But I wanted to mention it. So overall, I'm really happy with the Sound Devices MixPre 10T. It's going to be a great backup recorder for me, or a primary recorder in cases where I need a lot of microphone inputs. I'm really happy with the new features, including the inbuilt timecode generator with the Hiroshi power input. Those are really nice features that kind of make this a much stronger backup recorder for me than the MixPre 3 or 6 were. They each have their place. I'm really happy with all of them. Just wanted to kind of outline all of the features of each of them so they make sense to you, and you can make decisions if one of these is right for you. So hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave those down below. If you have not already subscribed, make sure you do that, and we'll be sure to get you more great videos on how to improve your lighting and sound. Also, if you'd like to be notified when new episodes are uploaded, go ahead and click the bell icon. Talk to you again soon.